Good morning and welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. Have you ever felt like life or God is crushing you? Have you ever felt like an olive?
Yeah.
Like a squeezed, crushed olive. You felt like this?
Yep. Absolutely.
So what happens then?
Wait for the good time.
No wait.
No wait.
It hurts. It hurts a lot,
Wait,
right?
It hurts.
Have you felt this, Chuck?
There's something good behind it.
Life is good.
Life has always been good. I love it.
Yeah, but you enjoy the oil afterwards.
Yes, you can't get to the oil without the crushing. Isn't it a funny thing? It's a funny thing, the way that God runs this world. Is that you want oil, you gotta go through the squeezer, right? So the Torah portion this week is essentially a paradox. As we're introduced to the longest narrative in the Torah, it's the story of Joseph. The Torah portion this week is Parshas VaYeishev, and it starts off on page 231, where Joseph in the Torah portion goes through 3 periods of crushing, of discomfort, of challenge, severe challenge. But in each one of those periods of crushing, he emerges on top. That's the paradox in the portion. You'd think that the more he's crushed, the more he's diminished, when in fact it's the other way around. It's a funny thing. The Torah portion, you look at it, it's a bit of a whiplash, this Torah portion. It's like a roller coaster. The more he's crushed, the more he's elevated. The 3 narratives of Joseph's life are as follows. We start off the Torah portion when he's 17 years old, on page 231. And for some reason, Joseph was beloved more by his father than the other brothers. He was favored. Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Ouch. That's what it says.
It's a common theme.
Favoritism.
Sure.
Good morning, Wyoming. Good morning, Bahamas and Michigan and Nashville. Wow, this is great. People check in from their locations. This is awesome. Nice to see everybody. Wyoming, Bahamas, like opposing weather patterns. There's the paradox right there. You got the snow of Wyoming and the sun of Bahamas. And Palm Beach, of course. Welcome. They converge in Palm Beach, where the weather's going to be amazing today for the 14th annual Chabad Golf Classic, God willing. So, what are you shaking your head? Say yes. Say amen. Okay. So, what's the common theme there, Rob? Favoritism, right?
Yeah, I mean, look at all the patriarchs. One brother was loved better than the other brother.
Abraham loved
one wife was
Isaac
loved better than the other wife.
Abraham loved Isaac, right? More than Ishmael. Isaac loved Esau more than Jacob. Ironic. Rebecca loved another one, right? Jacob. And then you got Jacob. I mean, you'd think Jacob would have learned the lesson. You'd think he would. No, he loves Joseph. Now, by the way, it gets even worse because at the end of the Genesis.
Rachel's firstborn.
Oh, he is Rachel's firstborn. Why? Because he had a favorite wife.
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, it wasn't his fault. He was only trying to marry one woman. He ended up with 4. I mean, that's when you have a very complicated father-in-law.
Tell me
Okay.
about it.
If you're having a love pentagon with one father-in-law, let me tell you, he had a rough ride. But at the very end of the book of Genesis, when Joseph is now when Jacob, the grandfather, is on his deathbed with Joseph's 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and now Jacob wants to bless them both, but he puts his right hand on the younger one. Joseph says, "Dad, seriously?"
He's blind.
He wasn't blind. Isaac was blind.
Oh,
Jacob was not blind. Joseph's like, "Dad, seriously? Do we really need to go through this all over again? This has not been enough trauma, right? It's like trauma is built into the book of Torah, right? But that's not even the topic we're talking about today. The topic we are talking about today, 14 degrees in Michigan today. Wow. Okay. So the topic we are talking about today is the topic of the paradox. Joseph is favored by his father, Jacob. And the brothers hate him for it. And by the way, God does the same thing. God chooses one child over the other. Which child is chosen by God? The Jewish people. right? So how do they react? Exactly the same way. They hate us.
Everyone hates it.
They hate our guts. What do you mean? This is the nature of the universe, right? So then what happens is that they decide to kill him. And that's, the second and third portions. Because Joseph's having these dreams of supremacy over his brothers. Everybody's bowing down to him. It didn't exactly help the
That
cause.
doesn't help.
Right? It didn't help the
I
cause.
don't think
He,
you want to
he
say
needed
that.
he needed a mentor.
I had
He
to
needed an
think so.
advisor.
I had to think
Shush
so.
still. Not everything you're thinking you have to share. But hey, Joseph is out there. Joseph was a dreamer of. He's like Beauty and the Beast. He was Belle, dreaming of a life beyond this little village. He was thinking of the metropolis, right? So, long story short, the second and third aliyahs talk about how Joseph is captured by his brothers when they're away from their father. They try to kill him. Instead of killing him at the last moment, they decide to sell him. This is his first descent into the abyss, right? Now, he then gets sold as a slave to an Egyptian family, an advisor to the Pharaoh. And there, something very unusual happens. Take a look what happens. Okay, there's a little a sub-story here, which is the story of Yehuda and Tamar, but we're going to skip to page 243. Page 243, the fifth reading, it says, Joseph, middle of 243, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, a courtier of Pharaoh and a chief of his butchers, a prominent Egyptian, had bought him from the Midianites, who had bought him from the Ishmaelites, had brought him down there. God was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. Can you imagine a slave as a successful man? It's a little odd. This is the beginning of the paradox, right? You'd think he'd be at the very bottom of the barrel. He was sold by his brothers. He's now a slave in the house of the Egyptian master. You'd think that he'd be miserable, depressed, angry, right? Maybe he would be anesthetizing, but no. Joseph's master saw that Joseph was deeply aware of God's presence. Since Joseph always articulated his awareness that it was God who was with him. He always said, Baruch Hashem, blessed be God, God willing, right? With the help of God, right? Ooh, Chris, I like what you're saying. Okay, we're going to get that in a moment. Good. Thank you. I can't pronounce your name, sir, but no, wow. Okay, good. Johnny, whatever. Okay, anyways. So, Potiphar therefore understood that it was God who had granted Joseph success in everything that he did. Joseph was so successful, he gained favor with him, and he became his attendant. His master put him in charge of his household, entrusting all that he owned into his care, except for one thing he didn't put in his care. As soon as they put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, God blessed the Egyptian's household and Joseph's merit. Literally, everything he touched turned to gold. Literally, it's not literally. Sorry, I wouldn't say literally. Whatever he touched turned to gold, metaphorically. God's blessings was evident in everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. He left everything in Joseph's care, and he did not concern himself with any of his own affairs other than the bread that he ate. What's the bread that he ate? A euphemism
For his wife.
for his wife. That was the only thing he didn't put in the bread that he ate is a euphemism. There's a lot of marriage counseling we can derive from this.
Bread is your wife.
Bread is your wife.
Base?
That is also
Before
Torah.
you get to the Potiphar point.
So just to clarify, in case you missed the plot over here, it says that everything in his possession, Potiphar put in charge of Joseph, and whatever he touched metaphorically turned to gold, other than the bread that he ate. That was not in the governance of Joseph. That is a euphemism for his wife. Okay. Ironically, his wife began to seduce Joseph, or attempted to seduce Joseph over many months, and eventually, when he got very close to succumbing, he ran away from her, and she got so mad with him that she had him thrown into the dungeon for the next 12 years, which was his third descent into the ever lowering abyss. So why is a wife called the bread that he ate? What's the lesson here, my friend? Maybe you could tie it into, Marty, maybe you could tie it into what we've been learning in the past few weeks, that if you look at your wife as bread, I think it's a very perfect metaphor to what we've been learning, where we've learned that in Chassidus Chabad, we've learned that a husband is the giver, the mashpia, and the wife is what's called the makabel. Makabel means receiver, but it's not really the receiver. We described it as the farmer and the land, right? Where the farmer plants the seed in the ground, and what does the ground do? The ground does receive the seed, admittedly. But once the ground receives the seed, the ground becomes an even bigger giver. An even bigger giver. How? Subsequent giving of the ground. You give the seed, the ground the seed, the ground will give you an orchard.
You give your wife a seed and she gives you a baby.
Exactly. You give your wife a seed and she gives you a baby, right? You give your wife a house and she'll give you a home, right? You give your wife money and she'll give you a life, right? So along the same way, I had somebody I was counseling yesterday, and the person was very, very perturbed about what his wife needs to be doing for him and how she needs to be talking to him and giving him and caring for him and nurturing him and making his feelings better. And I said, you barking up the wrong tree, because your wife is the bread that you're eating. In other words, you can't expect the bread to make you feel better, right? You can't expect the farmer can't expect the ground to make him feel better, right? Just like you can't expect your kids to make you feel better. Listen, if you do your part, the ground will give you so much more than you ever dreamed of, right? If you give your wife what she needs, she will give you so much more than you ever dreamed of. And maybe the metaphor is perfect here, because you can't expect the bread to make you feel better. But if you do what you need to do, then the bread will nurture, will sustain you.
Simpler level, just baking the challah, right? That's the wife's job.
Wife's job, bake challah, right? It's interesting. There's a connection there to the challah. The wife's mitzvah is the challah. The 3 mitzvahs of the woman. In other words, your relationship with your spouse should be one where she's actually nurturing you. She's giving you life. The bread is that she's giving you life. What are you worrying about petty nuances when what she gives you is so much more than you give her, right? So in other words, in other words, the mashpia makabel dynamic, the giver and receiver dynamic, is more accurately when the husband gives and the woman gives much, much more. There's a giver and there's an even greater giver, right? That's the dynamic of marriage. But that's totally off the topic, folks. We're going to go back to what we're talking about, right? Sorry, you threw me off there a little bit. Took me off an exit. So Joseph gets thrown into the dungeon a third time. First in the pit, then he goes into the slave in the house of Potiphar. After she tries to seduce him and fails, and he refuses to submit on page 245, she basically has him thrown into the dungeon. If you go to the middle of 244.
Can we go back to 243 of line 68?
Yeah.
I think that's an important line.
I don't see line 68.
68.
What page?
243, line 68.
There's no line 68.
Of a different
No, it's not line 68. It's footnote 68.
Yeah.
It says Potiphar bought him because he was attracted to his.
You're on the wrong page. It doesn't say. It doesn't say.
No, he's on the right page. It's sentence number 1. Look at
It's right
the
under- it's
light.
number 2.
Okay,
light word.
as mentioned above, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Is that what you mean?
Above
On the next sentence.
And Potiphar, a courtier of Pharaoh and the chief of his butchers, a prominent Egyptian, had brought him from the Midianites and in turn brought him from the Ishmaelites and brought him down there. Potiphar bought him because he was attracted to his good looks, but God made Potiphar partially impotent, so he could not act on his evil intention. From then on, he became known as Potiphar, and Pharaoh means mutilated. That's because he had a sex change.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
But that's
the master.
Potiphar?
Potiphar had a sex change. He became transgender
So there's no need
because he wanted to sleep with Joseph. Yeah,
no need for bread anymore.
Just impotent.
Yeah. yeah.
That's it.
Am I not supposed to say? Is this bad?
Sure, you're absolutely right.
I'm sorry. I should have given a PG warning before. So what's the question?
No, but why that's why Potiphar's wife was attracted to him.
Because her husband wasn't attracted to her anymore.
Well, because the husband couldn't do
Because he
anything.
was good looking.
Okay, fine.
The wife was attracted because she saw the Mashiach.
Oh, this is a whole deeper level of interpretation. Toby's onto something much deeper. Toby's saying that Potiphar's wife, we don't even know her name. Potiphar's wife sensed in some sort of subliminal prophecy. Cindy, the sex change was the master of Joseph, the guy that hired him, the man. He became a woman because he wanted to be with Joseph. Now,
Leviticus didn't like that.
it's a medrash. It's a medrash that says his name was Potiphar, but he got a feminine name, Potiphera. The medrash says his name became Potiphera. Why did he get a feminine name? Like, what's the guy's name who did it over here? The famous celebrity here? Whatever, that's in it.
It's for Joseph's protection. That's all.
Yeah.
Bruce Jenner.
Yeah, that one. He became a woman, right?
Yeah.
Well, he didn't become a
Oh,
woman.
Whatever. We're not getting technical. We're not getting biological here. But yeah, that's what he did because he desired to sodomize or not sodomize. He wanted to sleep with Joseph like a woman. Anyways, but Toby's onto something else. Toby's on to saying that she sensed in some prophecy or subliminal subconscious that that what happened was that that she was going to have a descendant through Joseph. So she knew she had to sleep with him, right? Now she didn't have the best of intentions. She on a superficial level, she wanted to cheat on her husband. Yeah, and the Egyptian culture was steeped in adultery. It wasn't anything unusual to that culture, but that's what she wanted. But on a spiritual level, it was because their children were meant to be together. And in fact, who does Joseph end up marrying? By the way, who does Joseph end up marrying? He marries a woman by the name of Osnat, who was the daughter of Potipharah. Who's Potipharah? The master of the one who turned to a woman, right? In other words, Joseph was a slave in the house of Osnat. These two grew up together, basically, right? So they knew each other, and in fact, their children, Joseph's children, are his father-in-law was this guy. His father-in-law became his mother-in-law, I guess, right? Right? He had two mothers-in-law, right? Okay, whatever. But that's off topic. So let me just go back to the paradox. The paradox is that in the house of Potipharah, he's very successful. Then he gets thrown into the dungeon because he doesn't succumb, right? And when he does that, look what happens in the dungeon. Let's go to page 244, the last English line on 244. Joseph's master, in addition to being the chief butcher, was in charge of the royal prison. He had a lot of jobs, this guy. Or this girl. Took hold of him and placed him in the prison where the king's prisoners were incarcerated, and he remained in that prison. This scandal became the subject of everyone's gossip. 247. God was with Joseph and made him well liked amongst the inmates. He also made the warden of the prison favor him. The warden of the prison placed all the prisoners who were in prison in Joseph's charge, and whatever was done, they was under Joseph's direction, which is not surprising because he was his master previously. He's also his master now, right? So the warden of the prison could not find fault in anything that was under Joseph's charge, for God was with him, and God granted him success in whatever he did. And this, again, friends, is this recurring paradox in the parsha. The more Joseph is crushed, the more he is able to rise to the top. What, pray tell, is going on, and what's the message to us? The Rebbe points out that the Rebbe quotes a verse from Isaiah chapter 66, verse 2, which says, and to this one I shall gaze, says God, to the poor and the humble of spirit, which means that that nothing repels the presence of God like ego, like arrogance, and nothing attracts the presence of God like humility. This is such an important lesson that we have to learn. When a person is like a poor person, when a person humbles his feelings of his own self-importance, and he feels himself like humble before God, as Joseph was in the dungeon the first time around, the pit, then in slavery, then in the dungeon, right? That is what brings to God's intervention, to God's blessing. Now, notice there was three different descents that Joseph had. First, he was in the pit of his brothers. It wasn't so terrible, but it was bad. Then he was thrown into slavery of a foreign family, foreign country. He couldn't care less about it. Then he was thrown into the dungeon of a foreign country where he wasn't even in a house. He was like in the tunnels of Gaza, right? So there's three subsequent descents, each one worse than the previous one, which shows you that when it comes to humility, there are differing degrees of humility. Now, it's no surprise that Joseph becomes, or maybe it is by great surprise, that Joseph, who was probably humbled more than anyone else in the Torah, think about it. Who else was humbled more than Joseph in the Torah? Who else was abused? What?
Moses.
Abused?
Moses.
How was Moses abused? Tell me.
No, I didn't say abuse, he was humble.
No.
Yeah, but
I'm talking about abused. I meant
right,
humbled.
the verb humble.
Oh, the verb humbled. Yeah.
Right.
Who?
Isaac, being bound and put on an altar.
Why is that abused? He was 36
was
years
that
old. He was 36 years old.
That's not being abused?
Hello, his father was his father was 136, and he was 37 years old. Do you think he was being abused? No.
I think he was going to jail.
Job. Fine. Job, maybe Job. Fair enough. Okay. But Job was abused differently. He wasn't thrown into this kind of a dungeon. So think about this for a moment. Who was the most successful, the most powerful, the most influential Jew person in the Bible? Was anybody more powerful than Joseph? I mean, I don't think so. Joseph was the second in command of the superpower of the world.
What about David?
King David was not the superpower, I don't think. Was he the superpower? But by the way, maybe he was. Even if he was the superpower at that time, Solomon was probably the superpower, his son. But David went like Joseph through terrible, terrible abuses.
sure.
His own brothers considered him a bastard.
Right.
His own father considered him a bastard. He was estranged by his family, right? So there's a lot of similarities here, right? Now, let's just focus on Joseph for a moment. Isn't it interesting how his father-in-law tried to kill him, right? Isn't it interesting that the one who was humbled more than anybody else is also the one who rose to the greatest successes above anybody else? And that's this extraordinary lesson that I wanted to share with you today. That when God crushes you, you've got two ways to look at it. Either you can say, God hates me. Woe is me. Or you can say, what's the lesson here? The lesson is that God wants me to be humble. That apparently I'm too self-absorbed. So you've got a choice. You can expedite the abuse or you can prolong it. If you're kicking and screaming, it's going to take longer. But if you say, God, get it. You're so smart. Thank you for teaching me the lesson of humility, right? Nothing humbles a person like seeing their bank account depleted. I mean, think about that, right? Seeing the stock market crash. You know how people felt the day of Bernie Madoff's, discovery? People that thought they were on top of the world. And suddenly they were coming to shul. What happened? Suddenly, like overnight, bam. Suddenly they were coming to shul. What happened to them? Is that they unfortunately, tragically, were being humbled. When God crushes you, it's for the oil to emerge. Somebody said over here online that it's the wine that comes out of the grapes. Think about it. The wine comes out of the grape. But you can't get the wine out of the grape unless you crush it. As human beings, we're born with the default setting of an ego. And that ego was instilled in us when Adam and Eve ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge. The moment they ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, they became self-aware. And that's why they instantly covered up their shame, because they became self-conscious of their nakedness. And the moment that God finds them, he says, one second, why are you guys wearing fig leaves? Did you eat from the tree of knowledge that now you are self-aware? Obviously, right? So what we've been doing ever since is trying to reverse that self-awareness, which is infused in us since the sin of the tree of knowledge, right? And I want to urge you to consider to reframe anti-Semitism for a moment. Let's reframe anti-Semitism. Imagine God gives you a choice. Imagine you were given a choice. Okay, God says, your soul is about to be dispatched down to this earth, and you're going to be an arrogant, you-know-what. You're going to be born into a very wealthy family. You're going to have all the money that you need. You're going to have 5 cars, 3 golf club memberships, right? You're not going to want for anything. Now, how would you like to be humbled? Would you like to be humbled with poverty, with illness, with horrible marriage, or with awful kids? Or do you want to be humbled with anti-Semitism? Take your pick. Which one would you choose? Just quick. What do you say?
How much money are we talking about?
I mean, think about that for a moment, right? Like, whoa, what a choice. Like, Abraham was actually given this choice. Abraham was given this choice. The Medrash tells us, God says to him, do you want Gehinnom, purgatory, or do you want Shibud, which is effectively anti-Semitism? Do you want to be abused by other nations for your children? Like, what do you prefer, right? So Abraham actually chose abuse. That's what he chose. He figured that it's going to be better for us if we're abused by anti-Semitism.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, but I want you to reframe it from 40,000 feet above. Let's step out of the victim mentality, okay, and try to step into the shoes of the master of the universe. He says, listen, I can only connect with you when you're humble, because your arrogance repels me. So what's it going to take, folks? What's it going to take? Right? And I'm sorry for your loss, Renee. Sounds tragic, sounds awful. And it's not for us to condone anybody else's suffering. God forbid. I'm only speaking right now in the abstract and theory without, God forbid, ever endorsing or condoning somebody else's suffering. Okay, but let's go back to the idea, right? What's it going to take to humble your ego? Well, how about you have a fifth choice? I gave you 5 choices, right? I said poverty, illness, horrible marriage, awful kids, or anti-Semitism. How about if you came up with a sixth option? You say, God, I give you a counter. Give you a counter offer. How about if I learn Chassidus every single day, right? And I self-humble, right? I'll self-humble because I'm going to daven every single day, and I'm going to meditate before davening. What am I going to meditate on? I'm going to make sure not to talk in davening. I'm not going to talk during Kaddish. I'm going to be respectful of my master, of my maker. I'm going to learn Chassidus every single day, so that every day, every 6 hours, in fact, I'm going to be able to self-humble. I'm going to what's called when you outsource the job, right? We're going to have an in-house counsel department for humbling. We're not going to need to outsource humbling to Hamas or Hezbollah or other organizations or United Nations, right? We're going to in-house counsel for humbling, right? Wouldn't that be amazing? And that is, my friends, what I believe is what the Rebbe was saying in that final discourse that the Rebbe delivered about the Tzaveh, the one that we referenced a few moments before this class, where the Rebbe said in the last discourse that was published of the Rebbe's teachings, the Rebbe said that, Kosis Lamor, the Rebbe was talking about crushed olives. The Rebbe was saying that, crushing is good because it brings out the oil, right? And when Jews lived in Russia, the Rebbe said, when we were not allowed to practice religion, what happened to the Jews? When we were crushed, it brought out our oil. We were fighting. You know this, the drill. You were involved personally, right? You know the woman who became religious in Chicago, Pam Cohen. She became religious when she was helping these Jews in Russia fight for their faith. And she was like, listen, I'm living in America. Nobody's taking away my faith, but I should practice it. If they're fighting with their lives for their faith, then I should practice my faith when nobody's trying to kill me, right? So in Russia, they were fighting for survival. In other words, because they were being crushed, they brought out their oil. The Rebbe said the challenge of our times, the challenge of our generation is exactly this point. Is to be able to do this without anti-Semitism, to do it without crushing. Now, this is no easy feat. It's like make wine without crushing grapes. How am I supposed to do that? With a syringe, maybe, like extract the wine with a syringe? I didn't even know how to do that. Make oil without crushing the olives, right? The Rebbe is saying that the call of our generation is that Jews of America who live in times of prosperity instead of times of torture and abuse. Here, when we're not being bitten by Esau, here we're being kissed by Esau. Instead of us assimilating, here we should say, I am broken humbled because I cannot connect in a deep and meaningful way with my spouse, with Hashem, with my master in heaven, with my father, with my lover in heaven, which is God. God is our lover, right? So when there's 2 ways to loving your spouse. Think about it this way. Imagine if your spouse is very, very ill with a terrible illness. What's going to happen? God forbid. Imagine. Imagine a person's spouse is very, very ill. What's going to happen? It's going to bring out tremendous, tremendous love because you're afraid of losing the spouse. But imagine if you could love the spouse that way without the terrible illness. Wouldn't that be amazing? Like, why do I need to have a catastrophe, calamity in order to love you? Why can't I just love you on a regular Wednesday? Right?
Well, we do, don't we?
Not everyone does.
I don't know. Maybe you do.
I do.
You do, not mine.
Right. And you should be an example to all of us. You should give a lesson. Right? But this is what King David says. This is what King David says when he sings in Psalm 62, I think it is. Sama lecha nafshi, my soul thirsts for you. Kama lecha besari, my flesh pines for you. But yet in land, which is tired and parched without water. In other words, when I'm in the desert, I'm very, very, very thirsty. So God, when I'm not with you, I miss you. It's like, when your wife is in another country, you miss your wife. You miss her very, very, very much. But imagine when you were with her, right, in the restaurant. Imagine you take out your phone to check in case some guy you never spoke to in 43 years decided to send you an email, right? Imagine you'd miss her that much when you are with her. That's what King David cries out in Psalm 62. Kein ba'kodesh chazi sicha. If only I would, when I'm with you in the holy space, to see, to gaze upon your glory and your strength, right? What King David is saying is awesome psalm. Is God, I miss you when I'm not with you, but I wish I would miss you as much when I am with you. I'm thirsty for water when I'm in the desert, but I wish I was thirsty for water when I was in the city. I miss my wife when I'm not with her. I wish I missed her when I am with her. And that is the call of our times. Let's not wait for external crises in order to break us, to force the oil out of us. The call of our generation, the Rebbe's last will and testament in his Maimer, the last Maimer about the Tetzaveh, is, guys, we're mature enough. We've been doing this for 3,250 years. We don't need a bully to give us a bloody nose and a broken tooth in order for us to remember who we are. You don't have to remember who you are because of outsourcing anti-Semitism. Learn Hasidus every single day. And when you learn Hasidus every single day, when you take it seriously, folks, you won't need the anti-Semite. And I want to remind you, I'm sorry, I'm just on a flow here a second. I want to remind you, it's coming up to Hanukkah. It's coming up to Hanukkah, and the Rebbe says in a discourse which we've learned last year, 1978, the Rebbe taught the discourse of Toner Rabbanan in Hanukkah, 1978, and you can find it over here on my YouTube page, the whole discourse. The Rebbe says, the only reason we had the anti-Semitism of the Greeks was in order for the Jews to discover their one pitcher of oil. What's the one pitcher of oil represents? The essence of the soul, their self-sacrifice. The moment they were able to discover their commitment to God, which is unconditional, which is represented by the one pitcher of oil that's untouchable, that even the Greeks couldn't touch, that was unable to be rendered impure because it's the essence of the soul. When they were able to discover that essence of the soul, therefore the Greeks just sort of dissipated on their own. We don't make a big stink out of the Greek victory on Hanukkah. It's all about the oil. It's all about the oil. We don't talk about the victory so much. It's like a tangential point. The reason is because the whole reason for anti-Semitism was only in order to remind us of who we are, to the point of self-sacrifice, to the point of absolute commitment, unequivocal commitment. But if you're able to reach that all by yourself, you won't need the Greek. If you could go into the temple by yourself and exhibit that degree of love to your spouse, that degree of love to your divine spouse, because we're mature, we're no longer a nation in diapers. We're not even in puberty anymore. We are mature adults in the cosmic progression of our nation. Let's act like we're in our 40s or 50s or in our 3,250 of our age, right? We're 3,338 years old, for heaven's sake. Act like you're grown up, right? We can do this all by ourselves. Yes?
Are you this reminds me of the parable of the donkey that falls into the hole. Are you familiar with
Yeah.
And so the donkey falls into a deep hole on a farm. Farmer comes over, and there's no way he's going to be able to pull the donkey out of the hole.
So he starts to bury him
away, unless he gets a truck and a crane, and he doesn't have the money for that. So he says, you know what, I'm just going to bury the donkey. So he throws the first shovel of dirt into the hole, and the donkey shakes the dirt off, and then the farmer throws the second shovel of dirt. The donkey shakes that off, and he begins to climb. And with each shovel of dirt that the farmer throws into the hole, instead of the donkey letting it bury it, uses it to step up and up and up until he gets out of the hole.
Yeah, so he climbs on the dirt.
Right, so then he's up. So it's very much like Joseph and others. You can either let the dirt bury you, or you can use it as a stepping stone to do something greater.
Very good, Rob.
Rabbi,
Rob, that's very good.
Rabbi,
Exactly right. Go ahead.
if I can mention the basis and foundation of Joseph's success, all ties into his tremendous commitment to God, his scholarly. He studied Torah all the time, and he was always, no matter where he was, Torah came first. And to say that Joseph, the expression, he loved Joseph more. As a parent, we don't love our children more. We may favor somebody. And Jacob favored Joseph because he studied with him all the time. He was a great scholar. And Joseph brought that Torah with him. And the famous expression, you are where you're supposed to be, comes from Joseph. So no matter where Joseph was, he always believed it came from God.
Exactly right. And that's why the more he was humbled, the more he rose higher. Velvel, you wanted to say something?
No, just talk about oil and wine. You crush
olive, you get oil. From grapes, you get grape juice. From grape juice, you get wine. So wine is a byproduct of a grape. Oil is directly from the grape, olive. Whether it makes any difference, but the analogy is.
So you're saying wine is from the grape, but oil is?
Wine.
Wine is from grape juice.
Wine is from grape
Olive
juice.
oil is from the olive.
It's indirect.
So you know what? It's interesting. I got an idea. Can I tell you something? Velva, it's a very interesting point. Velva, it's a very interesting point. I want to comment on that. Which gets more pressure, the wine, the grape, or the oil? Which gets more pressure?
Oil.
The olives gets much more pressure, right? Because grapes you can crush with your feet. You know the old vats that would stamp on them, but you can't stamp on grapes on olives. You got to crush them through the millstone, right? The more you crushed, the more pure is what comes out, right? So Joseph had different degrees of crushing. In the second degree, in the first degree of his crushing, when he was sold by his brothers and in his master's house, he was still, there was still some ego left over. It wasn't yet pure. It was only when it's completely crushed like an olive that he was able to bring out his oil. It's a beautiful point to rise to the very top. But otherwise you got to go through a process of.
No, we understand. We agree with you.
Beautiful, very good, guys. Thank you very much. Yeshikach Gadol Ma'od. Thank you all. Thank you so much.